Yeah, so we're going to move directly into our panel discussion now, and I'll kind of let the panelists, minus Brad since he just talked, introduce themselves. So we have Amy Fagan, Lauren Jozwiak, Clive, Neal, and Brad, who are going to, I'll let them introduce themselves, and then they'll kind of open up give some perspectives on long-term strategy for planning our CLPS landing sites and science strategies. And then we'll open up to Q&A for as long as we can fit in. So I'll let you start, Amy, and take it away.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Fagan. I'm an associate professor at Western Carolina University. But in this context, I have the great honor of also being the chair of the Lunar Exploration Analysis Group, or LEAG. I'm the first author on an abstract that you can find in the print-only section of the program. So if you go to the agenda and scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll find that abstract. My illustrious co-authors are Brett Denevy, Ben Greenhagen, Jen Heldman, James Keene, and Mark Robinson. So I encourage you to read that. But that abstract served as part of the inspiration for this panel, which is why I wanted to mention it. I think everybody here recognizes that CLPS and PRISM are major game changers in terms of the moon, and it's a fantastic example of how thinking outside the box can be an effective approach. Right now, this program first selects the landing site and then the payloads. So as these programs continue and evolve, we actually propose an alternate path forward that would be first to identify the science objective and perhaps some location constraints, and then select the landing site. So an example could be if the science objective was to examine the age and compositional variation of lunar basalt, some of the location constraints could be, okay, but it has to be somewhere on the far side. That's going to allow proposers to propose specific goals within that objective and include prioritized landing sites that would fit that payload's specific needs to ensure maximum results. So this would be kind of an integrated science objective into that campaign strategy. Of course, Brad mentioned there's lots of other components that need to be taken into account by NASA when selecting things. So we understand that. But one of the added benefits of this strategy would be to potentially reduce the burden on proposers. So for example, proposers that did not get selected in an initial science campaign call could tweak their proposal and submit it for the next call and potentially get selected, rather than developing a completely new proposal for each call to be able to find some science that's achieved at a specific landing site. It could increase the overall quality and of the proposals and incentivize PIs and institutions to continue to submit. And so that's going to add to the overall health of the program. In addition, on Tuesday, I also wanted to bring up that I presented to the Planetary Science Advisory Committee that LEAG suggests that a roadmap be created for when particular CLPS capabilities could be available. So this is going to help to accomplish science objectives, to support Artemis, such as pre-deployment of a rover, but also to act as reconnaissance for human exploration. So this is going to require sending data back that would enable science from Artemis to be improved and exploration objectives from there as well. And it will benefit the CLPS providers. If they have a timeline or an idea of when some of these capabilities are going to be requested, that's a great thing for them as well. So coupling those capabilities in a roadmap with prioritized science and landing sites is also a must. LEAG could develop that roadmap based on the Lunar Exploration Roadmap, the National Resource Council 2007 document, Scientific Context of the Moon, and any of those other community documents that we all know and love so well. But it could also include things like what components are required capabilities versus enhancing capabilities. And those are some things that you'll see on that giant sticky board, the Muro. So that's one thing that Ryan mentioned she wants us to be working on. And it could examine what science objectives could also be included or addressed in part by CLPS, in contrast to science for a larger class mission such as New Frontiers or Discovery. So it would really kind of fit into a broader lunar science and exploration plan. So those were some of our thoughts. And I wanted to turn it over to, let's see who's next on the list. Lauren, turn it over to you.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. So I'm Lauren Jozwiak. I'm a staff scientist at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. I'm also, in the context of this panel, a member of the Next Generation Lunar Scientists and Engineers group. So I'll be providing a little bit of the early career perspective. So the postdocs, your early career colleagues, and some of the things that we are looking for in the CLPS and in the PRISM program. I've also, for context, participated in a couple of PRISM proposals at various levels. So there's a little bit more of a mechanistic approach to some of the comments that I'm going to provide here. And one of the first ones is, I think there's this idealized thought that, oh, because PRISM is a much smaller program, it is an easier way for your early career colleagues to get involved and get mission experience, start to get their toes wet and get these critical skills that will allow them to then contribute in higher capacities to larger missions like Discovery and New Frontiers missions. And this is, I think, something that really should be leveraged and should be considered in a lot of how PRISM is structured, because it really is a great, quick pathway to getting these tools and getting these capabilities. However, there's a lot of downside to the way PRISM is currently structured, and that largely being the cost and the speed with which things need to be executed. There's not a lot of time for learning on the ground, and there's not a lot of funding available to early career proposers in terms of the amount of actual contribution you can have as a science team member is not really commensurate with what you'd say get in an RNA proposal. So there needs to be a consideration of the balance that if you want to include early career proposers, the amount of funding that they're going to get out for their participation cannot be a barrier to their participation, which is a little bit more of a philosophical view of the PRISM proposal, but something that I wanted to get out there, having come up several times in discussions with other early career colleagues. Another thing that I want to talk about just from the early career perspective, because it ties in with what Amy was discussing, with this idea of, do we want to have a roadmap of locations that we go to, or focus more on the science and then leave the destination up to the proposer? And I would make a suggestion almost for something a little bit of a middle road, which ties in with some of the things that Brad was talking about with the lead time that the vendors need, and that for early career proposers who do not have necessarily a huge network of colleagues on whom to call, or don't necessarily have a huge stable of instruments whose capabilities they're readily familiar with, if the proposers could be given a lead time of destinations in the same way that the vendors are, I think you could only improve the quality of the proposals that you get. So this doesn't necessarily have to be location agnostic or completely science driven, like Amy suggested. But if there is some sort of roadmap, some sort of idea of, okay, these are the PRISM locations for this year, but in next year or in 2 years, we'll be looking to have locations that either address this science or go to these locations, so that people who are earlier in their careers can have time to start putting together these proposals. Because although the proposal time is very short, we all know that there is a lot that goes into these proposals. It's not like an RNA grant. These are huge proposals. And so the idea to even just redust them off the shelf every time your favorite location comes up is a little bit fallacious. But I do think this idea of having a little bit more preparation, a little bit more lead time, and if the lead time is already known for the vendors, I don't see why that necessarily can't be shared with the community. So that's where I'll stop there to give Clive time to talk, and then we can have more discussion.
Unmute. Thanks, Laura and Amy and Brad. Very comprehensive talk there, Brad. I think the point of the workshop here is to look at evolving CLPS, and I think it's inherent that we drive that evolution, because if something's not evolving and growing, it becomes a target to being cut. And I certainly don't want the CLPS program to be cut, because it represents a broad new set of opportunities, especially, as Lauren said, for the next generation. And as a member of the old generation now, I can say that, you know, our goal is to set up that this has longevity, it is enduring, and that future generations can benefit from the experience that CLPS gives everyone. But there's a tightrope that we need to walk as a community, and there's a 600-pound gorilla sitting in the corner, and it's will CLPS prevent lunar missions from being proposed to Discovery and New Frontiers? And that gorilla has roared in the last Discovery round quite loudly. And I think that this type of evolution, or at least some direction from NASA headquarters, needs to be given, because as Lauren said, you put together a mission proposal for Discovery and you have no major weaknesses, yet you don't get picked to go to phase A because of programmatic balance. Becomes well, why should we bother? So I think that we need to tread carefully as we move forward. I think CLPS should evolve, but I also think we need clear direction from headquarters as to how this is going to evolve and how this is going to affect lunar participation in the Discovery and New Frontiers class missions. So then I'll be quiet and we can get to questions.
So y'all can add questions in the chat box. But while we're waiting for people to put questions in there, I kind of wanted to bring us back to kind of the roadmaps. So we've had a couple roadmaps that have been brought up that would benefit the CLPS vendors as well as the science PIs. I kind of wanted to see what the perspective was of Brad and Clive on that, of, you know, how would you maybe envision that being included, or how could that help CLPS and PRISM evolve?
After you, Clive.
Well, again, I think we've got some great foundational documents. What we need to do now is tailor it in terms of, can CLPS deliver the science? If you go through the Lunar Exploration Roadmap, you look at the SCEM report, you look at some of the National Academy's documents that came from CAPS regarding New Frontiers 5. For example, CLPS cannot deliver the Lunar Geophysical Network mission as envisaged to last multiple lunar nights, because right now CLPS can't, and it's not been evolved to that. Now, could it in the future? I don't know. It depends on the path that's taken and the direction that the providers are given to allow that evolution to occur. And I think it's important for CLPS to do that, because we need to think of it as not only CLPS to the moon, but other destinations. And the moon, because it's close and it's useful and it's interesting, becomes a natural test bed for that, to see if it can go farther afield on the basis of the launch and delivery capabilities that are now available that weren't 5-10 years ago.
Well, Clive, let me ask you, and actually anyone on the panel, or you know, I think part of what I'd like to hear from this workshop in total is, you know, what do you believe that you can get from? Now, this isn't an answer for the record, and it's not my position, but it is, what do you believe you can get out of Discovery New Frontiers that you can't from CLPS? And the reason I ask that is, I don't want this community to be limited to thinking, oh, I have one CLPS lander or one CLPS opportunity to get my science done. Could a science, I mean, I could see it very possible to propose a science investigation that requires, you know, 2 or 3 CLPS landers to get the science done, and you know, 2 or 3 PRISM proposals worth of instruments in order to make that happen. I don't think that type of thinking to utilize CLPS and multiple landers, multiple opportunities should be off the table. I think that should very much be within the scope of what we're trying to accomplish with CLPS, and really focused on getting at the big science questions. I mean, clearly we don't have any landers, we don't have any landings under our belt yet, but I have to believe that we're going to get really good, high quality, impactful science out of these deliveries, and now that said, you know, clearly New Frontiers and Discovery come along with bigger budgets and bigger opportunities. But can a lot of the science be done with clips? This is a question I have for this panel and this community.
Can I jump in here since I have some strong feelings on this? Not strong. I have feelings.
Please.
The strength is to be determined. And this was something that I actually was not aware of being thought about in this community, this idea of campaign science via clips. But I will say my first thoughts are that, could it be done? I mean, yes, you probably could do it. It depends on the target, obviously, since if you're having multiple landings in the same region, do you have impacts of the actual lander coming down, scouring the zone? Depends on what science you're trying to look at. If you have rover tracks crisscrossing a site from 5 generations of CLPS missions, does that affect the kind of science you can do at a site? But stepping away from that, again, as someone who has worked quite intimately with a couple PRISM teams, the scope of the science that you're able to do with CLPS currently, due to the cost constraints, due to the payload constraints, is very focused. And you can design a really great mission. We've seen this with Lunar Vertex. It's a really great focused mission on the lunar magnetic anomalies, but it's inherently limited. The quality and development of the instruments that you can send to these locations is inherently limited because they're Class D missions. Sometimes you have to make the compromise to go with commercial off-the-shelf parts as opposed to custom designed parts, custom designed filter wavelengths for whatever you happen to be imaging, because you just don't have the ability to design it from the ground up like you would with a Discovery or a New Frontiers. And in that same vein, I think there is something that's missed out on with a set of cohesive measurements. And that when you start to try and piecemeal the science and you do, say, to use a really blanket example, you really focus on imaging science the first time you go down. And then the next time you go down to a different part of the location, say it's a broad Mare, you're trying to investigate basalt composition. And then this one does geochemistry over here. And then you have another one that comes and it does geophysics over here. Those could be completely different mission teams. In fact, there are probably going to be completely different mission teams. But now you're trying to cobble together over the period of, say, a decade, the science that you could do in a really comprehensive, integrated way with a single Discovery mission or with a New Frontiers mission. And could it be done? Yes. But there's a question of, is it to the benefit of the science? If the science is driving it, then I think we should also let the science drive it. We can understand that there are some sites where you can ask a really focused question, but there might be other sites where you really just want a comprehensive system view, and divorcing those two and understanding that there are differences there and how those differences can then be leveraged in the PRISM site selection. If I think what Clive is talking about, this sort of evolution of how we use PRISM, and that maybe this is part of how we use PRISM, is understanding that there are these different types of landing sites and understanding how to leverage the different mission assets.
I think Lauren did a really great job with that, and there's a lot of chat in the window. So just a couple of things just to kind of highlight. Let's see. James Keene adds, to Brad's point, if you want to use multiple CLPS missions to address a certain science goal, so a sample return campaign or distributed network and measurements, which is brought up by another user below, then that should clearly be, oh gosh, things are moving, stated in some sort of strategic plan. And so then that also, I think, sparked some people to put in things of, well, can it deliver the lunar geophysical network, you know? And so that's really starting to, I think, shift the way that we can think about CLPS if we go more from a science campaign strategy and from a strategic plan strategy, because we really kind of thrown out the rule book here with CLPS and PRISM, and it's a totally new paradigm. So there's also, let's see, did that give you a good enough information, Brad? Because I do want to try to pull in some questions from the chat. Things to think about.
Yes, and yeah, it was great. And Lauren's answer was amazing. I will say, just in response to Clive, you say CLPS currently doesn't survive lunar night. That's true and not true. The reason it's not true is because many of the vendors indicate they can do it already. It's just we haven't asked for it yet. And in part, that comes back to what I was talking about earlier, is we don't know how much that's going to cost us and how much it's going to break our bank, and whether that's going to take us from because we asked them to survive the night, is that going to be another 50 million? I don't know. We don't know how much that's going to be, and then that would have impact downstream on our 2 deliveries per year. So we're trying to figure that out. But many vendors claim they can survive the night already, and so as we're trying to evolve the program, as we've done with Prism 2 and Grutizen and offering mobility as a service, you know, we're slowly trying to figure out how much these costs and whether they fit within the confines of our budget overall.
Well, we need to talk offline because I can give you some costs on
that. I'll take them.
Well, you probably won't.
So I'll just also add in, Brad, you know, one of the benefits of having a strategic plan or a roadmap, though, could lay out, okay, if we prioritize, this is the highest level science, but we also understand, you know, we might need to wait a little bit for a particular capability to be developed. At least that's laid out for the vendors to say, okay, the top 2 things that they want to do are going to need this capability. We need to start working on this, because if they don't know far enough in advance, it's going to be hard for them to justify spending that time in the development of some of their capabilities. So, all right, I'm going to pop over to the chat and scroll up. So let's see. Oh, and it keeps moving. Ryan, I could maybe use some help with questions, because when people add things, it shifts everything.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm trying to scroll as well and see which ones we haven't hit just yet.
Okay,
what about failed missions? How do we deal with
that
failure?
was what I was just saying. Yep.
I think that was from Dean, wasn't it?
Oh, it's from
Dean. It's from Dean.
Oh yeah, Brad, do you need us to read the question?
Yes, please.
So
basically, the summary is, how do we handle failed missions or deliveries, since we don't
with
call
a
them
shot
missions?
of whiskey, or a bottle of whiskey each. It's a good question, and you know that it's part of the benefit. I don't know. How do we handle it? Learning process, right? You know, Thomas Zerbuchen, the A for SMD, has called CLPS, you know, shots on goal, and hopefully more shots go in than not. There's a strong chance we're going to have a bad day one day. What can we do from that? We can learn from it and move on. You know, you're going to say, so the next question, well, okay, if we have a failed mission, will the next mission automatically go back to that location with that same proposed payload set? And I can't say that, yes or no. But I will say that that overall, we, NASA, are doing everything we can to ensure the success of the vendors, to help, you know, to provide them with, you know, landing site characterization, and we actually have an initiative to figure out if there is anything we could do above and beyond that within the legal confines of the contract structure. So it's a hard question, and we will have a bad day one day, but hopefully not too many of them.
I want to move on to Carly Peter's question. Oh, go ahead, Clive.
Can I just make one comment on that?
Yeah.
Is that I strongly urge SEO to set up a strategy for dealing with a failed mission, because by the very definition of CLPS, they take on more risk, and you will have a failure. And I would set up a what is it?
It is not shareable at this time, but I would argue that the higher risk posture that we adopt with CLPS allows for broader opportunities to the community for instrumentation, and that risk posture also keeps costs down, so it allows for more opportunities. So it's a give and take situation. So while I'm probably not going to share what's going to happen when we have a bad day at this moment, I will say that the risk posture actually affords more opportunities as a community, which I view as an overall positive.
Well, you did share. You have whiskey as your response for dealing with a bad day.
Well, that's my personal way.
Okay. Lauren, did you want to add anything? Otherwise, I was going to move on to Carly's question.
No, that felt like a pretty Brad directed question. So,
Okay, so Brad, this is from Carly Peters. In particular, how are or can they provide, I'm assuming she means the CLPS preventers, the broadest integrated return? For example, has the landing site for the CRISM lander been selected? It would have added value to target a magnetic anomaly there, since those anomalies are some of the few that do not exhibit swirls. So that's kind of, I think, pulling back into that idea of, you know, campaign science of where can we accomplish some of these various different things. So I think that's for you, Brad. Is there an underlying strategy here?
It is an underlying strategy, but I would also like to hear from the panel on this one in particular, because we have talked about campaign science. We've talked about an issuance of a PRISM or solicitation that talks about standalone instruments that would be, you know, either or destination agnostic instruments that would be good to have anywhere, everywhere we go, heat flow, magnetometer, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess I'd like to hear from the panel and the rest of the community how you would envision seeing that kind of, this is the data set that we need every single time we go down everywhere we go in order to kind of blanket the moon with data sets from this particular topic.
I don't think it's a bad idea, but the question that I would have is NASA or is SEO then equipped to pay for that and not put that cost burden on the proposers? If this is deemed by the community that say we need to have a magnetometer on every mission that goes up. Sure, magnetometers aren't that expensive, but there's accommodation and there's mass. So is that going to be taken out almost like a co-manifested payload would be taken out, and then you still have your normal PRISM pot of money to work with for your specific science for that site? That's...
I wouldn't... Oh, I'm sorry, I'll cut you off.
Oh, no, I was finishing up.
Okay, I wouldn't say, I would look at it the other way. I would say, is that a community directive that you think is incredibly important? And if so, then it would be incumbent upon us to figure out how to pay for it. And so if it comes out of the PRISM budget, or if we were, you know, if we broadcast that to the vendors and said, hey, vendors, we want this instrument on everything that we send down, put it in as a part of your bid for your proposal, then it becomes part of the delivery budget instead of the PRISM budget. And so, yes, all that's going to come at a cost at some point, but it's kind of where does that bucket, or what bucket does that come out of? And so I would ask this community, and through this workshop and future workshops, to, you know, help us prioritize that so that we can start planning for it in overall manifests.
Well, I think that's where the idea of a roadmap to look at what decadal level science questions can be addressed by CLPS and what can't, and then what needs to happen to CLPS in order for them to be able to do that. It then gives you a framework with which to develop the cost strategy, and those that fall outside the cost strategy could go to discovery and new frontiers. And there's boundaries between the programs, and there's some things that shouldn't be proposed to discovery and new frontiers, and there's some things that should. In terms of lunar science, it creates boundaries, it creates transparency in terms of what's allowed and what isn't.
I think Clive brings up a good point again of kind of bringing back the discovery and new frontiers and how it can incorporate with that. And that's a concern that's brought up again in the chat. Let me see if I can find it. It was Ben Greenhagen. Just a second. How can you address concerns that discovery or new frontiers concepts, potentially with years of institutional investments, could be invalidated by a PRISM landing site selection that addresses a key aspect of their science investigation? So do you interface with discovery and new frontiers proposing institutions? So I'm wondering if this means that there needs to be kind of a little bit more discussion between those different programs of what could the potential impacts be. And, you know, in addition, is it possible to have a discovery proposal or new frontiers proposal that also includes CLPS components? Like, can those proposers for new frontiers or discovery say, we also want to propose that CLPS do this component of it? Or is that totally insane?
I don't think it's
Are
insane.
Yeah, I don't think it's insane. I think it's actually incredibly prudent, just because I can absolutely see a case where an institution has been working on a New Frontiers concept, say for Farside sample return, and then 6 months before New Frontiers drops, there's a prism call for a Schrodinger basin again, or somewhere in South Polacan Basin. How would, if there has not already been communication, I think there's a very real fear that then NASA would just throw out the New Frontiers proposal because, hey, CLPS is already going there, and your 1A science investigation has taken off the board. So I think it's been said a lot in the chat, but I would strongly recommend that as much as possible the SEO office interfaces with that. And I know for discovery it's a little bit difficult because that's open to whatever the community wants to propose. But particularly for New Frontiers and with the new decadal coming out, I think it would be really great to see some sort of coordination with that. And I think Brett actually had a really great comment in the chat. I'm sure she's had several, but one scrolled by just as I was looking, that putting together this roadmap of science that can be done with CLPS, science that can be done with CLPS, plus some enhancements, and then science that is completely out of the box, and lining that up as part of this roadmap with the New Frontiers and Discovery concepts would be really great, because if they can help people funnel what they're proposing for discovery, knowing where the scopes of these sciences are and where the breaks are.
Yeah, and then I'd also like to add in, make sure everyone can see the chat, but Bob Grimm added a point that it is not new to have a lower class mission undercut a higher class one. Discovery Lucy did this to the New Frontiers Trojan mission. So, we're all aware this happens, and it is a big concern to have that. So,
Hey, Amy, can
I know
can
Ryan
I
said
will
we have
say
4
just
minutes, right?
just 10 seconds. Oh, sorry, Ryan. Just one
Go ahead.
quick thought on that is that I completely understood and hear all the comments. We do within SEO have 2 people that are joint with PSD, Sarah Noble and Amanda Nam, who so we are working closely with PSD on everything Lunar, and so we're yes, we hear you.
We have about 2 minutes left. I did extend the panel to 11:20. So as much as we can fit into 2 minutes, I would kind of like to address something that Barb Cohen commented on. I might add to it a little. Basically that for each CLPS mission, the vendor gets paid, the NASA managers get paid, the engineers get paid. But it's the scientists who are kind of at risk of harm, because our currency is papers. And sorry, it just jumped. There it goes. So if it fails, scientists get nothing. And CLPS does not currently recognize how much risk they're putting onto scientists' careers. And she comments that an offer to refly instruments on a failed mission would go a long way toward making it worthwhile. So I don't know, Brad, if you want to comment on how CLPS can better enable scientists, through PRISM or other means, or just address anything Barb said in there.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Barb said, and we just don't have an internal policy established. It's been discussed, but it's not been established yet on what we would do in that case of a bad day. I do understand her points, but I would also again come back to the cadence and sheer number of instruments and opportunities that this community has through the CLPS program. Overall, I think it is a bump up, even if we have a bad day here and there. Maybe
That's true,
maybe
but
that's
it's also
rose-colored glasses, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thinking of myself and again putting on the early career hat, that's great to say that there are a lot of these opportunities coming, but I mean, quite frankly, most of us in the early career position are not in a position where we're tenured professors yet, are not necessarily fully supported. And if you have one of these missions fail, I mean, first of all, it's a very short timeline, so you're probably only going to get one paper out of it before you'd have to turn around and go to like LDAP to analyze your own data. But that's a different conversation for a different day. But if you don't even get the opportunity for that paper, again, we're now talking the time investment to participate in these proposals versus the FTE support you're going to get out of it, versus now you have 3 more years before you, again, optimistically say the mission fails, you repropose to the very next of applicable PRISM selection, and you get selected, 3 more years down the line, now you finally get that first mission paper. That's just, I think it's a really big hurdle and it's a really big ask for the early career scientists to put themselves out there and not have any sort of guarantee that you're going to get any science benefit any more than a single line that on your resume that I could have done science on this CLPS proposal. So again, it's for some of the more research vulnerable members of the community. I think this is a huge concern, and it is for myself as well.
So I guess I would like to hear from the community on that then. Would it, so if we are forced to go for, or not forced, if we are encouraged to go forward with a more rigorous process overall, not only from the CLPS vendor perspective, but also from the instrument development perspective, that decreases the amount of opportunities we would have because that comes at a cost. What is the trade there where you would prefer one or the other? And so I guess
I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna
not trying to justify one way or the other. I would just like to hear community feedback on that.
Yeah, I'm actually just let one quick answer because we do need to get to the next session. But yeah, so I don't know if Laura and someone else want to jump in, and then we'll have to move on. And we can always reconvene this discussion in a later discussion period if we have time.
No, we're already far enough behind as it is. I don't have anything to add here.
Well, I'm gonna
jump in. I think it's things to think about. So I think we're.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think we have a lot of
forward.
things to think about and discuss. This has been a really great discussion, and I thank all of you for coming in and giving the different perspectives.